What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Black Massacre Series. Today we will be talking about Natchez, Mississippi, aka the Devil's Punchbowl Massacre of 1865. The Devil's Punchbowl episode is remembered on this date in 1865. This post-American Civil War atrocity in Black history occurred in Natchez, or Adams County, Mississippi. As black slaves made their way to freedom, the town of Natchez quickly went from a population of 10,000 to nearly 100,000 people. To deal with the population influx of recent freedmen, a concentration camp was established by Union soldiers to eradicate the slaves, essentially. Don Estes, former director of the Natchez City Cemetery, said, "So they decided to build an encampment for him at Devil's Punchbowl, which they walled off and wouldn't let him out." The camp was called the Devil's Punchbowl because of how the area was shaped. The camp was at the bottom of a cavernous pit with trees on the bluffs above. The women and children were locked behind the concrete walls of the camp and left to die from starvation. Many also died from the smallpox disease. Over 20,000 freed slaves were killed inside this American concentration camp in 1 year. Black men were recaptured by the Union troops and forced back into harsh labor. Researcher Paula Westbrook adds, the Union Army did not allow them to remove the bodies from the camp. They just gave them shovels and said bury them where they drop. Today, the bluffs are known for the wild peach groves, but the locals will not eat any of the fruit because some are aware of what has fertilized the trees. Estes said that during his studies, he learned that women and children were all but left to die in the 3 punch bowls. Disease broke out among them, smallpox being the main one, and thousands died. They were begging to get out. Turn me loose and I'll go back home to the plantation, anywhere but there. One researcher has noted that skeletal remains still wash up when the area becomes flooded by the Mississippi River at the Devil's Punchbowl. Now, when it comes to this particular story of the Devil's Punchbowl, I looked high and low to see if I could find any more additional information when it comes to this particular event. But this one had only a little bit put out there, and we know why that is. That is all by design. But I did find some additional information on another site that I would like to contribute when it comes to this event. In order to control the large numbers of African Americans, the Union Army created a wall encampment at a location known as the Devil's Punchbowl, a natural pit surrounded by bluffs. Many of the captive ex-slaves died of starvation, smallpox, and other diseases. Estimates claim from 2,000 to 20,000 formerly enslaved people died here in 1 year. Some scholars have suggested that the stories have been embellished or fabricated by Confederate apologists intent on blaming the Union Army for such said atrocities. Says the word concentration camp, or say the words concentration camps, and most will surmise the topic around World War II and the Nazis, but the hard labor, constant threat of death, and barbarism these microcosmic hells presented weren't unique to Adolf Hitler. In just 1 year, around 20,000 free slaves perished in the Devil's Punchbowl in Natchez, Mississippi, USA. After the Civil War, a massive exodus of former slaves from southern plantations trekked northward in hopes of reaching a location of true freedom. But embittered soldiers, resentful the people considered property were now free, had other plans. One tiny town's population mushroomed 12-fold from the influx, as researcher Paula Westbrook, who has extensively studied the Devil's Punchbowl, noted. When the slaves were released from the plantations during the occupation, they overran Natchez, and the population went from about 10,000 to 120,000 overnight. Unable to grapple with an instant population swell, the city turned to Union troops still lingering after the war to devise a merciless, impotent solution. So they decided to build an encampment for him at the Devil's Punchbowl, which they walled off and wouldn't let them out. The Devil's Punchbowl is so named for a cavernous, bowl-shaped gulch walled off by treetop cliffs, an area unintentionally made perfect for a hellacious prison by nature herself. A tangle of lush green, now topped bluffs near the Mississippi River in Natchez, hiding past atrocities that took place when Union Army soldiers corralled and captured those freed slaves in worse conditions than they'd endured previously as slaves on sprawling plantations. In the unrelenting heat and humidity of the Deep South, African American men toiled at hard labor, clearing thickets of brush, while women and children, not seen as a viable workforce for the task, languished without food or water behind the locked concrete walls of the camp to die of starvation. Barbarous treatment didn't even end when someone died. The Union Army did not allow them to remove the bodies from the camp. They just gave them shovels and told them to bury them. Bleak conditions of being cramped inside locked walls and forced to work until exhaustion or death also led to the spread of disease and illness, a little discussed but insidious issue for former slaves, killing up to 1 million individuals following the ostensive emancipation. However, a dearth of information about these mostly postbellum camps indeed leaves significant leeway for conjecture, and a smattering of conclusions say those detained prefer the slightly greater freedom compared to brutally found on the plantations. Additional critics dispute Westbrook and Estes and the number who died in the Natchez camps, saying the number is likely closer to just 1,000. But without methodical record keeping, the figure is impossible to verify with certainty. Either way, this black eye on American history is still one of the largest and most brutal acts of state-sanctioned death this country has ever seen. As the Civil War drew to a close and during the nascent stages of emancipation, those who had been thrust into slavery imputatively freed held a precarious place outside the society of their enslavement. Thus, legitimately freed individuals and escapees alike were captured and held in contraband camps, so named because as commodities they were considered contraband by Union troops who had no qualms about perpetuating slavery for their own benefit. 3 such camps existed in the Devil's Punchbowl area of Natchez. Historians' descriptions of the Devil's Punchbowl have been loosely anecdotally backed by locals who describe human skeletons occasionally washing free from the location in times of heavy rains and flooding. Wild peach trees now dot the basin where human beings who believed they'd finally won freedom from slavery sweated through work for different captors until death granted the ultimate reprieve. But Mississippians know better than to taste the bitter fruit fertilized with the blood of atrocity. Like so much of the history of the United States, sadistic acts perpetrated by officials acting on behalf of the government have been criminally downplayed to lessen the shame and facilitate collective memory loss. But there can be no doubt, whether unintentionally or by design, thousands succumbed to inhumane conditions at these camps under added duress of lacking the freedom so basic it's so-called cornerstone of the nation. Whatever the full truth about the Devil's Punchbowl, it's a veritable guarantee no history book will be honest or thorough enough to shed light on the excruciating conditions akin to Nazi concentration camps, or even that forced slave labor continued while America readjusted its crooked and tarnished halo after the Civil War. Now, what's interesting about this one compared to episode 1 is I had to go between about 3 different passages or articles just to gather this information because it was so spread out, and some of them had more information than the other. Of course, this one had more information, but that just shows you that they didn't want people to know that black people dealt with their own personal holocaust so bad, in fact, that a lot of them wish they could have went back to being slaves. It was that bad. And this happened in 1865, the so-called year that black people or black slaves got their freedom, their so-called freedom. This was literally enacted pretty much right after, because they did not want them to leave. They didn't want them to go and explore and actually build up an infrastructure. You heard how I said the population grew from like 10 to 120,000. That was fearful for them. So they had to do whatever it took. And then they created this. A little known fact about another stain, yet another dark stain on American society. Well, that's going to conclude episode 2 of the Black Massacre series. I hope that you learned some more information. If you didn't know anything already, I hope that you gained more knowledge. I know that I did. I heard about this before, but I didn't know to which extent. But when you hear something called Devil's Punchbowl, it can never be good. So with that being said, I'm going to conclude this episode right here. I have the videos in a playlist form, so if you've missed anything, you can go back and listen to them, or recap if you want to listen to them again if you've listened already. Be sure to stay locked in and subscribed and have your notifications turned on as we continue this journey down the Black Massacre series. Episode 3 will be available next week. Be one.